Hi, my name is Ben Waber, and I am one of the co-founders and the president of Humanize. It's been really interesting to me looking at the workplace over the years, looking at coffee, because my work really revolves around trying to use data about how people interact and collaborate at work to understand things like performance, retention, what have you. It's interesting, I guess, because I used to assume that things like where people sat or where the coffee machine is didn't really matter. In terms of the data that I hook into, though, it became increasingly clear over time how important things like that were for how people actually collaborate and actually the performance of an entire business. Specifically in my work, what I do is look at things like email data, chat, meeting data, but also sensor data about the real world to understand the patterns of collaboration between people, how people spend time, looking at how those networks change over time, and how they predict, again, all these outcomes that we care about. What we saw consistently, again, as we went from company to company during my PhD at MIT and then moving on to my commercial work, is that really the effects of physical space dominate how people collaborate. Right? Of course, if you sit next to someone, you talk a lot to them, which is not shocking. But interestingly, you also email them a lot. You will call them over the phone a lot. And when you think about things like a coffee machine, that is very different than seating, in that what that does is create more serendipitous conversations. Of course, I tend to sit next to people who are on my same team, but it's interesting that if I put a coffee machine, for example, in between two teams, those two teams will talk more to each other. Right? Of course, if I put it in the center of a team area, that team will focus more internally. You think of actually how powerful of a management tool that is. What we see across our data is that literally the location of the coffee machine predicts about 20% of all the interaction that happens within the company. Now, if you want to compare that to something, you could look at things like the org chart. And it turns out that the org chart also predicts roughly 20% of all communication in a company. Again, it's not to say that the coffee machine is as important as the org chart, but in terms of collaboration, they're fairly similar. Of course, the org chart also useful for decision-making rights. Again, it's very important. But you think about typically how haphazardly companies choose where people have coffee, and you can start to understand why it's really an underutilized management resource, that it's an incredibly powerful management tool that companies have. Now, extending this to coffee itself, of course, it's not just waiting by the coffee machine and chatting for someone for 5 minutes that creates a lot of interactions. It's also something that then people can actually have a longer conversation over as they're drinking coffee, whether that's by the coffee machine, at a cafe area, or at their desk. And that's an incredibly important social mechanism. Again, if you think of the coffee machine and interactions there as these serendipitous cross-cutting interactions, that tends to relate to innovation, to creativity, and then there's literally decades of research on that. And we've validated that behaviorally, but it's pretty well established. When it comes to then actually having a longer conversation over something like a hot cup of coffee, you are going to create much stronger relationships. That's more helpful for things like building trust, exchanging complex information very quickly over the long term. Right? Again, if we know each other very well, and if we talk not just about work, again, it doesn't really matter so much what we talk about as much as it is we're building a stronger relationship with people. Right? These are the sorts of things that those sort of interactions facilitate. It's something that you see even as during a pandemic, people are working from home. You see the echoes of those behaviors that were formed in the office continue today. You're more likely to email or chat today, even working from home, with the people that you talk to face in the office. And it means that even doing things like having a virtual happy hour where you actually get coffee or something else with coworkers in other parts of the world or who you used to sit next to and don't anymore, that actually has real value. And that creating a space for a longer, more personal interaction, it can be about work, but of course it can also be about other things. Again, really in the long term is incredibly critical for the health of the organization and for us as individuals.